Welcome to the Reddit mic.
Okay, so today we've got this stack of sources that landed on our desk. Specifically, it's excerpts from a Reddit thread.
Oh yeah, which one?
It's titled, BF31M woke me 34F up at 2 a.m. to make him dinner. I made him leave instead.
Yeah.
It really blew up on our Best of Redditor updates.
Wow, yeah. That title alone
Right.
tells you it's going to be something. Promises a bit of a wild ride.
It really does. So our mission today, let's try and unpack this. It seems simple on the surface, but it's actually pretty bizarre. We need to figure out the dynamics at play here and pull out some of the, surprising insights, not just from the original post, but from all the reactions. And crucially, the update the original poster gave.
Yeah, definitely need that update.
We're talking relationships, expectations, maybe even how the internet sort of bleeds into real life sometimes.
Absolutely. So we'll look at what actually happened step by step, then dig into the boyfriend's explanation, which sounds, head scratching is probably putting it mildly, and see what the internet hive mind made of it all. Connect it maybe to bigger ideas about boundaries, respect, that kind of thing. Online trends, too.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Let's dive in. So the original post, it sets the scene. We've got the poster. She's 34, and she's been dating this guy who's 31 for just a couple of months.
Okay, so relatively new relationship.
Exactly. She says things seemed okay. Maybe she mentioned some small beige flags, but overall fine. He's apparently super stressed with work.
Right, I remember that part. Like, people quit on his team.
Yeah, leaving him totally swamped. So they decide to spend the weekend at her place because it's quieter for him to do remote work than his place.
Makes sense. And she notes he's working really hard, like late into Saturday night. He's stressed, not really eating the food she's offering or making. She's being pretty understanding about it,
Totally. She points out there are plenty of leftovers for him in the fridge. Whenever he gets hungry, just help himself.
Which sounds, perfectly reasonable. Supportive partner stuff.
Yeah.
Low-key.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then, the twist. It's 2 a.m., she's fast asleep.
Oh, boy.
And he wakes her up, shakes her awake.
Yeah.
Because he's hungry now.
Seriously, after she told him about the leftovers.
Yep. And when she's groggy, confused, reminds him about the food already in the fridge.
Yeah.
He gets grumpy. That's the word she's grumpy.
Grumpy, okay.
He insists he wants something fresh, cooked right then. And she specifically remembers him going on about wanting things like coconut shrimp.
Coconut shrimp at 2 a.m.
I know. Who even thinks of that? Especially when there's perfectly good food ready to go.
And this is where it gets, even worse, right? The escalation. Because when she didn't immediately jump up, maybe she was silent or just repeated about the leftovers. He didn't just stay grumpy, he shifted gears.
Yeah. What did the post say? He started having a go at her.
Yeah, basically accusing her of not doing her duty as his girlfriend by making him food on demand.
Oh, come on. Doing her duty.
That exact phrase. And that apparently was the thing that snapped her fully awake. Like, wait, what did you just say?
I bet. Doing your duty by making coconut shrimp at 2 a.m. after being offered food already. Wow. And her reaction was immediate.
Crystal clear, according to the post. Just get out of my house.
Good for her. Seriously.
And apparently his whole attitude changed instantly. He realized, oh, she's serious. Started apologizing, trying to hug her, backtracking fast, but she wasn't having any of it.
Nope. Sounds like she held front.
Totally. Followed him, started literally packing his stuff in a bag for him, told him again, leave. She even had to throw his car keys at him before he finally got the message that this wasn't just some sleepy tiff. He had to go.
Wow. So she really stuck to her guns. And the original post, written later that morning, Sunday morning, confirmed she still hadn't spoken to him.
Right. She said she felt annoyed, just kind of dumbfounded, admitted she knew she'd have to talk to him eventually. But yeah, privately, she just thought he was an idiot.
Which seems fair, honestly.
And that leads us straight into the update, which she posted just the next day, actually. The original post got such a huge reaction, people were clamoring to know what happened next.
Okay, so the update. He actually showed up at her job to talk.
Yeah, a bit intense, but okay. And this is where we get the reason. The explanation for the 2 a.m. shrimp demand.
Okay, let's hear it. What was this grand reason?
He told her, get this, his friends had seen some online video, a video of a woman being woken up by her partner to cook for him.
You're kidding me.
Nope. And apparently he and his friends decided, amongst themselves, that they should all test this out on their own girlfriends as a loyalty test.
A loyalty test by demanding seafood at 2 in the morning. Is he serious?
That's what he claimed, a loyalty test.
Okay, her assessment seems pretty spot on then.
Yeah.
Idiot, confirmed.
The update says she broke up with him right there, on the spot.
Good.
He was apparently surprised, but he took it calmly. Accepted it, maybe sadly, but accepted it. She also made sure to add, no drugs involved, no major mental health crises she was aware of.
Just spectacularly bad judgment.
Exactly. Bad judgment was her phrase. And she clarified, because people are commenting about unconditional love or trying to work through it.
Right, because they didn't know how new it was.
Exactly. She emphasized it was very new, less than 3 months, which kind of changes the calculus.
That's a big difference. Between 3 months and 3 years or 10 years.
For sure. And maybe most importantly, she said she felt good about breaking up. Relieved, even. Planning to buy wine to celebrate, not settling.
Nice. Okay, so that's the story. Now, the reactions. The internet community. You said it was huge.
Oh, yeah. Overwhelmingly on her side. Just pouring scorn on the boyfriend.
What were the main points people latched onto?
Well, his age was a big one. 31.
Right. Not exactly a teenager.
Exactly. Terms like man-child were flying everywhere. The general feeling was just this kind of behavior. Demanding food like that, waking someone up, ignoring the food already offered, especially after she'd been understanding about his work stress. That's immature, period. But doing it at 31, that just seems so much worse to people than if he were, say, 21. It highlighted this perceived, a severe lack of basic maturity and respect for his age.
And the whole loyalty test idea? How did that go down?
Utterly ridiculed. Universally mocked. People were not buying that it was about loyalty.
Okay, so if not loyalty, then what? How did they interpret it?
They called it a compliance test, or even an abuse test.
Ooh, okay. Stronger language.
Yeah.
Why compliance?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Commenters really connected the dots. They didn't just say tests are bad. They focused on the specific nature of the demand.
The coconut shrimp at 2 a.m. part.
Exactly. Waking her up, demanding a specific kind of complicated dish when leftovers were right there. That's why they saw it as testing compliance.
Ah, so it wasn't about fidelity or something. It was about, would she just obey?
Precisely. Would she obey a completely unreasonable, almost performative demand? One designed purely to see if he could exert control, especially after he dropped that loaded, entitled phrase about her duty.
Wow. So the absurdity of the demand itself was kind of the point. From their perspective, it showed what he was really testing.
That's how many commenters read it. Not just, is she loyal, but will she put up with ridiculous, disrespectful behavior just because I demand it? It was seen as a blatant check to see if she'd just roll over.
Okay, that makes a disturbing kind of sense.
And people pretty quickly linked this whole thing to specific corners of the internet. Lots of comments brought up things they called, red pill ideology or the manosphere.
Ah, right. Those online communities.
Yeah. Some even mentioned specific figures like Andrew Tate, suggesting that this type of performative test, this specific trope, often originates in those kinds of online spaces.
So the idea is that these spaces sometimes promote testing partners to see if they'll tolerate disrespect.
That seemed to be the strong consensus in the comments, that his behavior, and especially the loyalty test explanation he gave, wasn't just random bad judgment, but maybe him acting out a script he picked up online.
Wow. So it's not just a bizarre one-off incident, potentially.
Yeah.
It's like imported toxicity.
That was definitely a key takeaway for many reacting online. They felt it was a prime example of how that kind of toxic online content can spill over and mess up real-life relationships, using these twisted tests to, weed out partners who actually have boundaries and self-respect.
That's unsettling. But it also brings us to another angle that came up, right? The historical stuff.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Beyond the whole modern online angle, the thread kind of unexpectedly sparked all these anecdotes from commenters, people sharing stories about their grandmothers, great-grandmothers.
Dealing with similar stuff.
Dealing with, similarly entitled husbands, demanding food at all hours, criticizing cooking, that kind of thing.
Huh. So it's not entirely new, this dynamic.
Apparently not. But what was striking in those older stories was this recurring theme of the women eventually just drawing a line, saying enough.
How did they do that back then?
Well, sometimes, and this came up multiple times, the tool for setting that boundary was a frying pan.
You're kidding. Like actually hitting them.
That's what the stories claimed. Several commenters shared these, family legends of grandmothers or great-grandmothers resorting to hitting their demanding husbands with cast iron pans when they were just pushed too far.
Wow. Okay. That's intense. A different kind of conflict resolution.
It sounds pretty wild to us now, obviously, but you get the sense from the stories that maybe in eras where women had way fewer options legally, economically, something that direct, that physical, even if extreme.
Might have been the only way to get the message across.
Yeah.
That this was absolutely not okay.
Perhaps. The only way to convey absolute seriousness. There was even one comment sharing this really dark piece of advice a friend got about buying kitchenware.
Oh, yeah.
Something like, always think about what would happen if you beat someone around the head with it. If you think there's even a chance it'll dent the pan or the tray, buy something sturdier.
That is grimly practical. Wow.
But it connects back, doesn't it? Even though the catalyst here is totally modern and weird, this TikTok-style loyalty test, the core dynamic, partners making unreasonable demands and women finally deciding, nope, done, that seems pretty timeless.
Yeah, that tracks. And the original poster's reaction, the swift breakup, especially because the relationship was so new.
Yeah.
People really praised that, right?
Hugely. Saw it as a really strong example of recognizing red flags early and just setting that boundary immediately, not getting sucked in.
It does highlight maybe an advantage of things ending early sometimes.
Instantly. You haven't built up years of shared life. Maybe kids aren't involved. Finances aren't deeply tangled. It can make it, well, maybe not easy, but easier to see bad behavior for what it is and act decisively before those sunk costs start clouding your judgment.
Right. Before it feels too complicated to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, pulling this all together, what does it all mean? We've seen this, like, absurd 2 a.m. demand spiral into a breakup. And the poster felt great about it.
Right. We looked at the boyfriend's really bizarre explanation, this whole loyalty test thing he apparently got from an online video.
Yeah, and the community reaction was just swift, calling it a compliance test, not a loyalty test. And linking it straight to potentially toxic online stuff. The specifics of the demand, the shrimp, the timing, were seen as key evidence for that interpretation.
Exactly. And then we saw how this very modern story also kind of echoes older historical anecdotes, women pushing back against entitled partners, sometimes quite forcefully.
Showing that while the form the problem takes might change, like the online test thing is new, the underlying struggle for respect and boundaries in relationships, that's not new at all.
Yeah, maybe the real insight here is just how easily these, I don't know, niche or even toxic online ideas can provide a kind of twisted playbook for how people act in real life.
But also maybe how quickly people now can recognize that playbook and reject it, especially when it shows up as something so clearly disrespectful and frankly absurd like these so-called tests.
That seems right. People are maybe more attuned to it now.
So reflecting on this deep dive, it does make you think. In a world where online content is just everywhere, constantly influencing how people think and act, how do we get better at telling the difference? You know, distinguishing between genuine connection, real respect, and this kind of performative, manipulative behavior disguised as a test.
Yeah.
How do we equip ourselves, and maybe future generations too, to navigate that?
Yeah. That's definitely something to mull over, a really important question. All right, moving on to the next story. You know that feeling?
Which feeling?
That buzz after a date when it went, really well.
Oh, yeah, totally. The euphoria.
You're walking away, maybe keys still in your hand, just kind of floating, and you need to text your best friend, like immediately.
Great, gotta spill everything.
Exactly. And you type something maybe a little unfiltered, a bit dramatic, like, bitch, I think I'm going to end up marrying this guy.
Okay, yeah. A familiar thought pattern, maybe.
We've all had a version of that thought, right? But what happens?
Well,
What if your thumb slips?
oh, no, don't say it.
And it goes to him instead of your best friend.
Ooh, yeah. Instant freeze. The dread sets in.
That exact scenario, that heart-stopping moment, is where the story we're diving into today kicks off.
Ah, yeah. We found this whole saga, starting with a viral Reddit post about exactly that kind of mortifying text.
Right. But it's not just the initial mistake. We're looking at how it unfolded, the community reaction, and this really surprising update from 4 years later, all based just on the sources we pulled together.
So our mission today is pretty clear. Trace this whole thing. From the cringe text, the immediate fallout, what everyone online thought, and then the ending. Or, well, the update.
It's got everything, hasn't it? Cringe, laughs, and maybe even something kind of heartwarming.
Let's hope so. It promises that anyway.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The original poster, the OOP, she describes feeling exalted right after the date.
Exalted, good word.
Leaning against her door, keys still dangling, just happy sigh, that whole vibe.
Perfect setup for disaster, right? You're relaxed, you're buzzing, you let your guard down.
And out comes the phone.
Yeah.
And that text message. Bitch, I think I'm going to end up marrying this guy. Sent to him.
The immediate panic. How did she describe it again?
Oh, it was intense, feeling like she was dying, dead, wanting to bury myself. She talked about needing a void big enough to hold all my misery.
Wow. That's dramatic. But also maybe relatable in that second.
Totally. And wishing for a pact with the devil just to turn back time. Just 10 minutes.
Just 10 minutes. Enough to unsend it. She mentioned being sprawled on her library floor. Convinced life was over.
Yeah, and the sources gave us the TLDR from that first post, the summary. I mistakenly texted my date that I might end up marrying him. Realized too late the text meant for my best friend was sent to him instead. Short and horrifyingly sweet.
Wishing for a deal with the devil is... Well, it says a lot about the panic level. But obviously the world didn't end right there.
No, thankfully. We found her first update post came pretty quickly. She kind of walked back the immediate doom and gloom.
Right. She clarified she did eventually laugh, like the sheer ridiculousness of the timing hit her.
Which, yeah, you probably have to laugh eventually, right, to survive it?
I guess so. But the big question everyone reading must have had was, what did he say? She texted him immediately, right, to explain.
She did. Texted him saying it wasn't meant for him, added a crying emoji for good measure, and his response...
According to the sources, incredibly smooth. Almost immediate text back. Said he doesn't read text not meant for him.
That wink emoji. Doing some heavy lifting there.
Seriously. And then when she was still in her, permission to die mode and asked if she could just vanish.
What did he say to that?
Just, please don't. The kissy face emoji.
Wow, okay. Smooth operator.
And then the real confirmation things weren't totally ruined. He texted her the next morning about some travel plans they had.
So, okay, disaster averted, mostly thanks to him being pretty cool about it.
It seems so. But diving deeper into the sources, there's some crucial context here. This wasn't just like date number one with a total stranger.
Right, that's a really important detail. They'd been friends before this.
Yeah, for 3 years. Friends for 3 years.
Okay, wait, 3 years?
And this date, it happened just 2 weeks after he'd confessed he'd had feelings for her for a long time.
Whoa, where did that happen?
During a walk in Prospect Park, apparently. She even mentioned they counted 35 stars together that night. This date, the one with the text message aftermath, followed that big confession and their first kiss.
Okay, that completely reframes the whole situation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's not some random guy getting this intense accidental text after meeting once. It's someone she has history with, someone who just told her he has feelings.
So the foundation was already there. Friendship, shared history, now acknowledged feelings.
Exactly. That probably made a huge difference in how the text landed. It wasn't just out of the blue. It was, well, still awkward, but maybe understandable, or at least forgivable within that context. Vulnerability hitting soft ground, maybe.
Makes sense. And she also mentioned her library. People online seem to latch onto that.
Yeah, she clarified that. It wasn't like a giant mahogany paneled room.
No Downton Abbey library here.
Apparently not. It was a cozy reading nook she'd built herself in her New York apartment, thrifting, DIY projects. She said it was fulfilling a childhood dream, having grown up poor as a refugee.
Oh, wow. Okay, that adds another layer. Picturing her having her meltdown on the floor of this space she'd lovingly created, it makes it more vivid.
Definitely more personal. And once this whole story hit Reddit, the comments section, as you'd expect, went wild.
Oh, I bet. What were people saying?
Well, lots of humor, obviously. People riffing on her dramatic descriptions.
Yeah.
Like picturing her as a Victorian lady going, "Verily I am vexed."
Yeah. Or just the power of that opening. Bitch. It's quite an opener.
It really is. And people had suggestions, how to handle it.
Like, lean into the awkwardness?
Yeah, turn it into a joke, an inside quote. Someone suggested she greet him with, "Hi, husband," from then on.
Bullsh.
Or call him bitch, jokingly. Make it their thing.
It does sound like something out of a movie, doesn't it? The comments picked up on that.
Totally. Lots of rom-com comparisons.
Yeah.
Jane Austen vibes. Someone mentioned Ted from How I Met Your Mother. She apparently said she finally got his whole deal after this happened to her.
Oh, that's funny. Any other references?
The big one, of course. Jane Eyre. Reader. I married him. One commenter was actually disappointed she didn't use that exact line in her update later.
Missed opportunity. But it sounds like a lot of people related, too. Shared their own stories.
Oh, yeah. Tons of comments saying things like, "I texted I love you accidentally," or "I told my friends I'd marry him after our first date," Or even guys saying they told someone early on, "You'll be the mother of my children."
So that when you know feeling, even if it comes out super awkwardly or way too soon.
Exactly. That seemed to resonate. And the term cringe seppuku apparently came out of this thread.
Cringe seppuku. That's graphically accurate for that feeling. Wanting to metaphorically fall on your sword from embarrassment.
Pretty much sums it up, yeah. And lots of commenters kept coming back to that key point we mentioned.
The 3 years of friendship.
Exactly. That context was everything. People recognized it wasn't just the text, it was the text plus the history.
Okay, so that brings us to the big reveal, the update. 4 years after the original post.
Yep, July 2024. She comes back to Reddit.
And the post title, "Please tell me it was good."
It was perfect,
Yeah.
simple, direct. "Bitch, we got married."
Yes. Oh, that's fantastic.
Right. She said they actually got married about 3 years after the text incident, so roughly a year before this update post.
Wow, so it actually happened.
It actually happened. Her reflection was great, too. Just saying life is wild, and yeah, it turned into a real kids, that's how I met your father story.
That's amazing. Did she mention the Reddit comments again?
She did. She thanked everyone, said the funny comments really helped her get through the initial, well, the cringe seppuku phase. Kept her from spiraling.
That's actually really nice. And the TLDR for the update.
Equally perfect. "Bitch, I married the man?" Sending that text by mistake 3 years ago was just the truth.
Just the truth delivered way too early and to the wrong person. Amazing.
The reaction to the update was, as you can imagine, pure joy. People calling it wholesome proof of manifestation.
A self-fulfilled prophecy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone loves a real-life rom-com ending.
Okay, so let's pull back a bit. We followed the story, the panic, the context, the update, the reactions. What does this whole deep dive tell us, based on these sources, about, like, relationships or vulnerability today?
Well, it's definitely not just be vulnerable, is it? Because that text, in a different context, could have been a disaster.
Right. So what made it work here, according to the story in the comments?
I think it's a combination. It was accidental vulnerability, first off. She didn't mean to send it. But it landed with someone where there was already a significant foundation.
The 3 years of friendship, the recent confession of feelings.
Exactly. And his reaction was crucial. That smooth, non-judgmental, even playful response. He didn't freak out. He turned her panic into like a shared moment, almost an inside joke waiting to happen.
So the context and the partner's specific gentle reaction were the magic ingredients, not just the raw honesty of the text itself.
I think so. The comments really underscore this. People kept saying the friendship mattered. He likely knew her personality, maybe her tendency towards hyperbole.
So he could interpret the intent behind the accidental text, not just the words themselves.
Precisely. It speaks to the safety needed for vulnerability to actually work.
Right.
It needs a safe place to land.
What about that when you know theme that kept popping up in the comments? How does that fit? Was the text just a prediction?
Maybe less a prediction and more. Like a catalyst. Or maybe it just brought a feeling that was already there bubbling under the surface right out into the open, especially given his recent confession.
So the accidental text sort of forced the issue, but because the underlying feelings and history were there, it worked out.
That feels like a reasonable reading based on the sources. It was truth, accidentally revealed, but the ground was fertile for it because of everything that came before. The connection could handle it.
It's just wild thinking about how terrified she was initially, that cringe seppuku moment.
Right, and contrasting that with the sheer joy of, "Bitch, we got married." It's quite the arc.
It really shows how the things we think are world-ending embarrassments can sometimes become, well, the start of something amazing, the story you tell later.
Yeah, it suggests that maybe those moments where we feel most exposed, most afraid of revealing ourselves, sometimes with the right person, those are the moments that actually forge the deepest connections.
So, as you're listening to this, maybe think about your own experiences. Any moments of accidental oversharing or awkwardness in dating?
Yeah, have you ever sent a text you immediately regretted? Or maybe said something way too soon? Did it end in disaster, or did it surprisingly turn into something?
Oh, okay.
Or maybe you know a couple with an origin story that sounds like it belongs in a movie. Something that started awkwardly, or with a moment of unexpected, maybe even unwanted vulnerability.
It really makes you think about how fragile those beginnings can be, doesn't it? And how much depends on the reaction, the context. So maybe here's a final thought to chew on, drawing from this whole saga. How often are the things we're most scared of revealing, our unfiltered thoughts, or maybe slightly dramatic feelings, actually potential gateways to the connections we want most? Assuming, of course, we find someone who knows how to catch them gently. All right, moving on to the next story. The source material here is a series of posts, updates from Reddit. It's from the Arbista Redditor updates community, which tracks these things. And we also have comments from people who followed along.
Right. So our goal today is really to trace this person's experience. Pull out the key moments, the emotional journey, see how this very strange initial problem ended up revealing a much, much larger and ultimately tragic truth.
Exactly. We'll look at the initial puzzle, how things kind of escalated, that shift towards a medical cause, and then the really difficult aftermath described in those updates and the community's reaction.
Okay, let's unpack this. So it kicks off, I think it was August 5th, 2024. This initial post just grabs you because it's so incredibly weird. A woman, she's 26, writing about her husband who's 32.
And he has suddenly, completely out of nowhere, become convinced that she's pregnant.
Right. And she's very, very clear she is not pregnant. They weren't even trying that point, though they did plan to later.
Yeah, she's told him straight up. She even showed him a negative pregnancy test.
But he just doesn't buy it. She says at first he was, excited about it. But when she pushes back, says, no, I'm not, or shows the test,
he gets annoyed. Or just shuts down completely. He even apparently dismissed the test results, saying, oh, those things can be wrong sometimes.
Which, they can, but his insistence, it's something else. He's making comments about the baby all day long.
And the key thing she emphasizes right away is how unlike him this is. She keeps saying he's normally kind, level-headed, This is just not him.
She even mentions him putting his hand on her stomach, which is just, wow, so surreal. And that's where her confusion really turns into fear.
Understandably. She says she's feeling scared, totally lost, thinking maybe she should call his parents or find a therapist.
She even questions herself for a moment, like, could I be wrong? Did I gain weight? But no, he insists she hasn't gained weight. It's definitely a baby.
It's that complete disconnect, isn't it? And how fast it seems to have happened. The sudden, really alarming shift in the person she knows best.
And, well, like these things often do when they're not addressed or can't be, it started to get worse.
Yeah, she talks about a specific point where it escalated. She tried to confront him again, more directly, saying, look, this insistence, it's really scaring me. I'm worried about you.
Trying to reason with him, right? Offering practical things like, let's go to the doctor together, let's take another test right now.
Exactly. Just trying to find some way to break through whatever was happening.
But his reaction this time was much worse.
Oh, yeah. He apparently started calling her a liar over and over, accusing her of trying to hide the baby from him. Just really hurtful, nonsensical things.
And this is where it crossed another line, too.
It did. It got physical. She mentions he hurt her during this state. She qualifies it, says nothing permanent or even emergency care worthy.
For her husband, who she says would never normally do that.
Exactly. That was the absolute turning point. She didn't feel safe anymore.
So she left, made the really tough call to go stay with her mom.
And his parents got involved then, too. Went over to their place. The whole family could see it, apparently. Everyone agreed something was just very, very off.
But he wasn't willing to get help initially.
No, he resisted getting checked out at first. And the family kind of agreed, look, this behavior seems focused on her. It's become unsafe, so she should probably keep her distance while they figured out how to get him help.
Okay, so then we start getting updates. First, a quick one, August 11th. She says he finally agreed to see a doctor.
Yes, a little bit of progress there. And that led to another short update, August 15th. She confirms he's actually in the hospital now.
And that confirms what many people reading probably suspected.
Right. She says many people were right about it being a medical issue. So validation that this wasn't just a relationship problem or a sudden psychological break in isolation.
But she also gives this really sad glimpse of his condition in the hospital. She's visited him, and he's sort of back and forth.
Yeah, she describes it as a mixed state. Sometimes he's totally himself, her husband, and other times he just can't stand her being there. Really volatile.
And then just a day later, August 16th, they get the answer.
The diagnosis, a brain tumor.
Oh, wow. It explains the suddenness, the personality change, the delusion, everything.
It really does. And her reaction is, well, complex. There's maybe some relief in understanding why, but also this huge wave of guilt.
Guilt, why?
Because she started thinking back, connecting dots, headaches he'd had, other little things maybe they'd both just dismissed or written off. She felt awful for not considering something physical sooner.
Oh, that's rough. Hindsight is brutal sometimes.
Totally. So now there's a whole medical team involved, neurosurgeons, oncologists, figuring out what to do. But even with the diagnosis, those mixed moments continue.
Like moments of clarity mixed with the confusion or anger.
Yeah, she mentioned moments where he's trying to make her laugh, being his old self, and then suddenly shifting back into that anger or distance caused by the tumor.
This is where the story gets incredibly tough emotionally. She actually posted separately about this, I think September 8th. And mentioned it again later. She shared this really raw feeling.
Anger.
Yeah, deep, intense anger. And she's very upfront that it's not rational. She knows it's not his fault, but she's furious.
Furious. At him.
At him, yeah. For getting sick, for changing, for leaving her, essentially, much sooner than they ever imagined. Angry at the illness itself for just destroying their plans, their future.
That takes courage to admit, I think, feeling angry at someone who's terminally ill.
It really does. She says she feels like a horrible person for it, but the feeling is real because their life, this future they thought was guaranteed, was just ripped away by this disease.
And then the September 17th update comes, and it's just devastating news.
Utterly devastating. Her husband is dying. This is only about 5 weeks, maybe 6, since the diagnosis. He declined so quickly.
So treatment wasn't an option anymore.
No. They decided to stop treatment. He just wasn't strong enough to continue. The prognosis was stark. Maybe a month left. God, 5 weeks from diagnosis too.
Yeah.
That's incredibly fast.
It is. And that speed actually prompted a lot of comments, people sharing experiences or knowledge about really aggressive tumors like glioblastoma, which are known for causing rapid decline and significant personality changes. It sadly seemed to fit the pattern.
And the community response to her anger.
Overwhelmingly supportive, actually. So many people validated it, saying anger is a completely normal, if incredibly painful, stage of grief. Especially in a situation like this, with the trauma of the initial behavior changes caused by the illness itself.
It's like grieving multiple things at once.
Exactly. Grieving the person, grieving the future, and grieving the way the illness took them piece by piece, changing them before they were gone. People shared stories of similar rapid declines or loved ones changed by neurological issues, letting her know she wasn't alone in that awful mix of love and anger.
And then the final update, it was short, wasn't it?
Very short. October 27th. She just shared that her husband had passed away on October 16th.
October 16th. So let's just recap that timeline. The first post, the delusion about the pregnancy, that was August 5th. His death was October 16th.
Yeah, just over 3 months. About 3.5 months from that first bizarre sign to the very end. It's just stunningly fast.
The reaction after that final update must have been immense.
Yeah, you saw just waves of sympathy, profound sadness, people expressing heartbreak for her, for him, for the whole situation. But also, alongside the sadness, there was this undercurrent of relief. Relief that his suffering was over, that the difficult, altered state the tumor had put him in, that confusion and anger, was finally at an end for him.
That makes sense. It's a complicated feeling, but understandable.
Definitely. And commenters reflected on that too, the shocking way illness can just fundamentally change someone's personality. It touches on a deep fear, I think, witnessing or imagining that happening to someone you love, or even yourself.
And that idea of trying to remember the person before the illness.
Exactly. That came up a lot. How hard that can be, how much time it takes to separate the disease from the person you loved and hold on to the memory of who they truly were before it all began. It just highlights the unique cruelty of illnesses like this.
So wrapping up this deep dive, looking back at this whole story shared on Reddit, it just reveals so much, doesn't it? About how unpredictable life is, how fragile things can be.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder of how quickly everything we take for granted can change, and how symptoms that might look purely behavioral, maybe like a relationship issue at first glance,
It can actually stem from something deeply physical, something happening inside the brain.
Exactly, a terrifying medical cause right under the surface.
And it really throws the complexity of grief into sharp relief, especially grief that's tangled up with those kinds of sudden illness-induced personality changes.
Yeah, it validates those really difficult, messy emotions, like the anger she felt, showing that it's not something to be ashamed of, but actually a really understandable, though painful, part of processing such a profound and, frankly, violating kind of loss.
Yeah, violating is a good word for it. And you see the ripple effects, too, the impact on the whole family, that terrible journey of navigating hope, then diagnosis, then just this incredibly rapid decline.
It's a heavy story for sure.
It really is. So thinking about all this, what does it mean for you listening? Considering this story, how a physical change, a tumor, could create such a drastic shift in someone's reality and behavior.
Yeah.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? It leaves us with a question. How might understanding this physical vulnerability of the brain change how you view sudden, really inexplicable shifts in behavior, either in yourself, maybe, or in the people you care about?
All right, moving on to the next story. We're working with a Reddit thread from the Our Best of Redditor Updates community. It's this really detailed account of a conflict building within a marriage, and it all centers around the husband's childhood best friend.
Right, and the core situation, it involves a wife who feels just persistently undermined, disrespected, not just by this friend, but eventually by the friend's family too. And things really reached this incredibly uncomfortable peak during what sounds like it should have been just a simple favor.
Exactly. So our goal in this deep dive is to kind of unpack the layers here. What's this story telling us about, say, toxic friendships?
Yeah, and the impact of that subtle passive aggression too.
Definitely. And also, what happens inside a marriage when these outside relationships get so strained? And crucially, how our own past experiences can shape how we react or maybe don't react to conflict right now.
Absolutely. And we'll also look at the huge range of responses from the Reddit community. The support, the analysis, even some of the skepticism that came up.
Which is always fascinating in itself.
Totally. Okay, let's get into the story itself.
Okay. So the story comes from the original poster, OOP, she calls herself. She introduces us to her husband, who she says is a gem, which is nice.
Yeah.
And then there's his childhood best friend, a woman named Claire.
Right. And according to OOP, Claire always had this kind of chilliness towards her. It wasn't like outright rudeness most of the time, but this subtle, ongoing vibe.
Talking around her, not to her, was how OOP put it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And OOP says she really tried, being friendly, making conversation, being warm, inviting her places. But it just felt like nothing landed.
She lists all these things. She invited Claire to birthdays, barbecues, their engagement dinner, even the wedding.
And Claire's response was?
Consistent avoidance, bailing at the last minute, or just not showing up, including, skipping the wedding entirely.
Wow. Skipping the wedding. I mean, that sends a pretty clear message, doesn't it?
You'd think so. Meanwhile, Claire would still contact the husband. Often, OOP notes, specifically when she'd just been dumped or needed someone to talk to.
Okay. So what did the husband think about all this when OA brought it up?
Well, initially his reaction was sort of dismissive. He suggested Claire was maybe just a little odd socially, kind of implying it wasn't personal, maybe not intentional.
Ah, okay. And this is where OP's backstory becomes really important, right?
Absolutely crucial. She shares that in a previous serious relationship, her ex actually cheated on her with his best friend.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So because of that history, her current husband's openness, his loyalty, that was incredibly important to her. That past trauma really set the stage for what she needed in terms of trust.
It makes total sense. That kind of betrayal, especially involving a best friend, would make anyone super sensitive to similar dynamics.
Exactly. It primed her to notice it, but maybe, as she reflects later, it also made it harder to trust her own gut feelings early on. Or maybe to act on them.
Which brings us to this turning point. Out of the blue, Claire messages OOP directly.
Yeah, not the husband this time, but OOP herself, asking her to model for a photography project.
Okay, that is unexpected given the history. How did OP take it?
She was surprised, definitely. But she saw it, maybe hopefully, as a potential olive branch. A sign that perhaps Claire was finally making an effort.
A chance to connect.
Right, so she agreed to help. Claire was a photography major, needed models for a final project. It seems like a reasonable request on the surface.
Okay. And where did this photo shoot happen?
At Claire's family's home. OOP mentions they're quite well off, and apparently they have a fully set-up photo studio in their house.
Huh. A bit unusual, maybe, but okay.
Seemed a little odd, maybe in hindsight, OOP says, but not like a huge red flag right away. Until she and her husband arrived.
What happened?
The audience. Claire's entire family was there.
Wait, the whole family?
Yep. OOP describes them just hanging around like it was dinner theater, sipping wine, and just watching the whole thing.
Oh my God. That's incredibly awkward.
Awkward is an understatement, I think. Instead of, a simple modeling session, she walks into what she later called a social experiment.
And that's when the passive aggression really kicked in.
Kicked into high gear. The comments started coming from Claire's family, and they were, well, pretty pointed.
Like what? What did they say?
According to OOP, they started calling her husband our son-in-law.
Oof. Right in front of her.
Right in front of her. Then came the supposed jokes, things like the one that got away and Some bonds never fade.
Ugh, classic passive aggression. Smiling while delivering a jab. That stuff cuts deep because it's so deniable.
Yeah, totally deniable. It allows them to express that hostility without ever really owning it. The comments weren't like a direct insult, but they absolutely painted a picture, a narrative, that completely sidelined OOP.
And Claire's mom apparently got even more direct.
Oh, yeah. OOP quotes her saying things like, "We always thought Claire would end up with him, but life has its detours, I guess."
Wow.
And even, "Claire always imagined walking down the aisle with him," just stating it like fact.
That's incredibly disrespectful. And there was one comment that really stood out to OP.
Yeah, the one she said was particularly cutting was someone saying, "It's sweet of her to fill in, though."
Oh, fill in. Like she's just a stand-in. A placeholder.
Exactly. It completely diminishes her role, her significance. It's almost like a microaggression in that context, positioning her as like the wrong person, the obstacle to the family's preferred narrative.
And Claire, what was she doing while her family was saying all this?
Just smiling, snapping pictures, didn't say a word to stop them, didn't defend OP at all.
That silence speaks volumes, doesn't it? How was the husband reacting?
OP says he was clearly uncomfortable. Fidgeting, clearing his throat, he went really quiet. He apparently stayed close to her, tried to change the subject subtly a few times, but he didn't step in directly. He didn't stop the shoot or call out the family.
So OP just had to endure this. How did she describe feeling?
She said she felt like part of a social experiment, deeply, deeply disrespected, and kind of alone, even though her husband was right there.
God, that's awful.
But she stuck it out for about an hour just to let Claire get the photos she needed for her project.
And the drive home must have been tense.
Very quiet at first, she said. Eventually, the husband broke the silence, said something like, "Sorry about all that. That was weird, right?"
Just weird.
Yeah. And Oki found it really hard right then to even process, let alone articulate just how bad it had been, how upsetting.
And this inability to react or speak up in the moment, that connects back to her past, doesn't it?
It really does. She reflected on this later, realizing that her reaction, freezing up, enduring it, not making a scene, was deeply tied to her upbringing.
What did she say about her upbringing?
She described growing up in an emotionally abusive household. Passive-aggressive comments, being dismissed, walking on eggshells. That was just the normal background noise for her.
So she was kind of conditioned to accept it or minimize it?
Exactly. She said it trained her to think things like, "Oh, I've heard worse," or "This isn't that bad." It lowered her threshold for what felt like unacceptable behavior.
And it also explains the freezing response.
Precisely. It ties into that whole fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response system. When fighting back or running away isn't safe or possible, especially in situations with ongoing emotional manipulation, freezing, just shutting down, or fawning, trying to appease the aggressor, become learned survival strategies.
So her default in the face of that kind of subtle undermining attack was just to freeze.
Yeah. That past experience made it incredibly hard for her to recognize the full severity of what was happening while it was happening, and definitely hard to react assertively right then and there. It's a really stark example of how trauma can affect our present-day responses.
Okay, so what finally shifted things? What broke through that freeze?
It was external validation, actually. It kind of came out of nowhere. Her sister-in-law, Madeline, is someone she's close to and who also knows Claire, got involved.
Ow.
Madeline sent OBOP a screen recording. It was from Claire's close friend's story on social media.
Oh, okay. What was on it?
It was a video clip from the photo shoot of OOP posing, but the audio was the crucial part.
What could you hear?
In the background, clear as day, you could hear Claire's sister's voice saying, "Claire should have been the one to marry him."
Oh, my God. Actual proof?
Concrete proof. OOP's reaction, her words were, "I lost it."
I bet.
Seeing and hearing that, having that external piece of evidence that showed it wasn't just her perception, it wasn't her being too sensitive, it made the whole situation feel undeniably, fundamentally not okay.
So now she had something tangible. What did she do?
She sat down with her husband, and she showed him the video first.
How did he react to the video?
Immediately. OOP said his whole face changed. He looked genuinely pissed. Then she showed him the original Reddit post she'd written about the whole experience.
She showed him the Reddit post. Wow.
Yeah. And apparently reading the comments, seeing strangers validate her feelings and call out the behavior, that really hit him. She said some comments made him tear up. He apparently felt like the worst husband.
That must have been intense for both of them.
For sure. And that's when OOP laid it all out. Every snide comment, how Claire had consistently made her feel small, all her own efforts to be nice that were ignored. And then she drew her boundary.
What was the boundary?
Essentially, she said, if this doesn't bother you enough to act, then we have a much bigger problem. She couldn't be in a marriage where she had to, beg her partner to have her back.
She needed him to stand up for her.
Yes, and she put it bluntly. It's either me or her. An ultimatum.
Wow. So what happened then? Did they confront Claire?
They decided to call her together. Claire answered apparently all cheerful at first.
Of course.
But then they mentioned the video, and she immediately got defensive, tried to brush it off as just a joke. She apparently couldn't believe they were really mad over that.
Unbelievable. Did the husband step in?
He did. This was his moment. He told Claire it wasn't just the video, it was years of disrespect towards his wife. He actually admitted he was ashamed he hadn't spoken up sooner.
He admitted that. That's big.
Yeah, he explained he'd kind of rationalized her behavior away, told himself it wasn't meant badly, partly because, he didn't want to lose that lifelong friendship. But he was clear. The way OOP was treated at that photo shoot was disgusting.
How did Claire respond to that?
Her final comment in that call says everything, really. She apparently laughed. Laughed and asked him, wow, you're really cutting me off over that girl.
That girl. Still minimizing her, even then.
Right to the bitter end. But the husband's reply was apparently spot on.
What did he say?
He told her, if choosing between you and my wife ever felt like a hard decision, I wouldn't deserve her. If you can't respect my wife, you don't respect me. I simply do not want to be your friend anymore.
Damn. That's pretty definitive.
Absolutely. And the outcome was just as clear-cut. They blocked Claire and her entire family on everything. Done.
And how did things land between OOP and her husband after all that?
OOP described him as being really attentive afterwards. Checking in, listening, trying to truly understand the depth of what she'd gone through. She says she feels like she finally knows where he stands, unequivocally. Though she did add, understandably, that they still have some healing to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a big rupture, even with a positive resolution. So let's talk about the community reaction. It must have been huge.
Oh, massive, and really varied. A lot of it, as you'd expect, was strong validation for OOP.
People recognizing the disrespect.
Absolutely. Tons of comments saying the family's behavior and Claire's complicity was appalling. And many specifically validated her freeze response, connecting it to her background and saying how hard it is to override that conditioning.
What about the husband's role? How did people react to his initial inaction versus his later stance?
That got a lot of discussion. People debated why he didn't act sooner. Was it shock, the weight of that long history with Claire and her family, not wanting a confrontation in their house?
Maybe not recognizing the subtle digs for what they were?
Some suggested that too, yeah, that maybe men sometimes are less attuned to those kinds of microaggressions. Or maybe he was just waiting for a cue from OOP about what she needed. But generally, people praised him heavily for stepping up so decisively in the end once he really got it.
Okay, but you mentioned skepticism too. Not everyone bought the story wholesale.
Right, and that's pretty standard for these kinds of viral Reddit stories. Some commenters did raise doubts about the authenticity.
What specific things felt off to them?
Things like the dialogue seeming almost too perfect, too dramatic, like something from a script. OOP mentioning English wasn't her first language, but then writing very fluently with complex idioms.
The convenient details.
Yeah, like the wealthy friend just happening to have a full photo studio at home, the update coming very quickly after the event, the whole bit about showing him the Reddit post and comments, making him tear up.
And his final speech to Claire sounding a bit polished.
Exactly. And the dramatic "it's me or her" line, some felt it had a few too many perfect narrative beats.
And it's important to include that skepticism, not to dismiss OOP, but because it's part of the source material, right?
Yeah.
It shows how these online communities interact with stories.
Precisely. It shows that critical engagement. People analyze narratives online, looking for things that feel maybe too neat, too constructed, lacking the usual messiness of real life. It reflects a certain media literacy, I think.
What about Claire's motives? Any theories there?
Oh, plenty. Lots of speculation. Was it pure entitlement? Like she just assumed she could have the husband whenever she decided she was ready?
Seeing him as her plan B.
Sort of, yeah. Or maybe someone she thought she owned, in a way. Was she deliberately trying to cause trouble, drive a wedge between them? Or was she genuinely delusional about their past or his feelings?
Where did people generally land on that?
I think the consensus leaned towards a combination of deep entitlement and a deliberate Maybe desperate attempt to sabotage the marriage with that photo shoot stunt,
No.
weaponizing it.
Were there other common threads in the comments?
Yeah, a lot of people circled back to Claire skipping the wedding, saying that was a massive red flag that maybe should have been dealt with much earlier. Huge praise for the sister-in-law, Madeline, for providing that crucial video evidence.
Oh, capitalist.
Definitely. And also some practical concerns, like people worrying if Claire might misuse the photo she took of OOP.
Right, that's a valid point. Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. Pulling together the story, the reactions. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, first, it's a powerful illustration of just how insidious passive-aggressive behavior can be, how hard it is to pin down, to call out, especially if your own past makes you inclined to minimize it or freeze up.
Yeah, that link between past trauma and present reactions is so clear here. The freeze response isn't just a theory, you see it playing out.
Absolutely. And then there's the critical importance of boundaries in relationships, not just setting them, but enforcing them. And ultimately, choosing your partner, your marriage, over friendships or even family ties that are fundamentally disrespectful to that bond.
It also really highlights communication challenges within a marriage, doesn't it? How one partner might genuinely not see or feel the disrespect the other is experiencing to the same degree.
Right. And the need for that really direct, maybe even blunt conversation, sometimes needing external proof, like the video, to get on the same page.
And we saw how online communities can be this double-edged sword. They offer incredible validation and shared perspective.
But they also engage in this really critical, sometimes skeptical analysis of the story shared there, which is a dynamic worth understanding in itself.
Plus, the story, as told, gives us this vivid portrait of entitlement and maybe delusion in someone like Claire.
Definitely. So for you listening, this whole story really pushes you to reflect, doesn't it? Like, how adept are you at recognizing those subtler forms of disrespect aimed at you or someone close to you?
And how do you navigate those tricky social dynamics? When loyalty to a friend or family conflicts with supporting your partner, or even just respecting yourself.
Especially when those ties go way back. And maybe the most personal question, prompted by OOP's experience. If you sometimes find yourself freezing or fumbling in conflict, how might your own past be influencing that?
Yeah. Are there patterns you recognize? Maybe that tendency to freeze or maybe to fawn or just minimize things. Think about this story. What steps could you maybe take to become more aware of those patterns, to potentially build stronger boundaries, find your voice a bit more in those tough moments?
It's definitely a lot to think about. Complex stuff.
It really is.